Good evening. Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Minister of Tourism, Civil Aviation, Sustainable Development and Culture, and Member of Parliament for North Leeward, Honorable Carlos James, Director of the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center, Dr. Irusilla Joseph, volcanologist, the UWI SRC based at Montserrat Volcano Observatory, Dr. Thomas Christopher, volcano seismologist, the UWI SRC, based at Montserrat Volcano Observatory, Mr. Roderick Stewart. Director, the National Emergency Management Organization, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ms. Michelle Forbes, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening once again, and welcome to Eyeing La Soufriere. This is the second in a series of virtual meetings aimed at specifically addressing questions and concerns from communities in the vulnerable red and orange volcanic hazard zones. Since December 27, 2020, the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, and the UWI Seismic Research Center have been working together to manage the response to the eruption using the best available science and disaster preparedness strategies to protect lives and livelihoods in those communities and throughout St. Vincent. This evening, we'll hear firsthand from the experts on the latest activity at La Soufriere and the plans in place for North Leeward residents. There will be two question and answer segments during which participants joining by Zoom may ask a question either by using the chat box or the raise hand feature. Participants joining by YouTube, Facebook, or UWI TV website may submit questions using the chat boxes on those platforms, and these will be submitted to the panelists. We also have SRC and NEMO staff on these channels who will be responding to some of your questions in real time. We also welcome those joining via Digicel, Go Loud, and PlayGo TV apps. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Theresa, and good evening to everyone on the discussion this evening and all those who are listening to us in North Leeward, across St. Vincent and Grenadines, and further afield in the region and elsewhere. I'm very happy to be here again with another of these consultations. I participated in one in relation to the Northeast, and we are doing now one to the Northwest. And there are several consultations taking place across the country on an ongoing basis. And I know that the public address systems mounted on moving vehicles, persons have been broadcasting through them from time to time to bring persons up to date as to what is happening at La Soufriere. And there have been regular bulletins. There's a mountain of information which is coming. There is also the published, and it's on the website of NEMO, the plan in relation to the volcano. It's available to all concerned. If there's an eruption, what do we do? And of course, details are there for a family, each of us, to have family plans, and it's important, just in case there is an explosive eruption, a cataclysmic eruption. For several weeks now, we have been having an effusive or oozing eruption, and the experts will speak to you on this matter. I want to thank the Seismic Research Center at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad, for helping us very much in monitoring the volcano over the years, and particularly since this phase of the oozing eruption, and also the Montserrat Volcano Observatory. and they're here helping us further. Our own seismic Soufriere monitoring unit, they've been doing their work. And of course, NEMO, headed by Michelle Forbes, also doing their work very well. And we owe them all a debt of gratitude, and the media and everyone who has been putting out information concerning what has been happening and in making the preparations for what may happen and what do we have to do just in case there's an explosive eruption. At the moment, as you know, and is repeatedly said, there is no order for an evacuation. There is no imminent explosive eruption of the volcano. It's oozing, and we have to live with it. It's nature. But if the worst were to come to the worst, I want you to know that we are preparing ourselves as a country and government, and you should be preparing yourself with your family plan, and you have to pack something, have it ready at hand, and you put some things in it so we can get you to shelters. In the case of North Leeward, we have opportunities to get you there by boat. We can get you there by road. Fortunately, the Chateaubriand jetty is now the rebuilt Chateaubriand jetty. This modern one is there available, but there's also jetty facilities and landing facilities for persons to get on and get off in the Barley area and also at Leeward. So and naturally in Kingstown. So we have several points on the road and of course also by sea. If there's a volcanic eruption, the way the monitoring is going, and the Seismic Research Center have been putting in collaboration with NEMO, a lot of pieces of equipment for monitoring. And CDMA has been helping us in this regard also in our work. As I said, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And we will have places or shelters, we will have schools, we will have guest houses, we'll have hotels, and we have facilities also external to St. Vincent and the Grenadines if that becomes necessary. On the last occasion, we evacuated between 16 to 20,000 persons in the northeast and the northwest, and that's the kind of number which we'll probably have to evacuate again if anything serious were to happen, like an explosive eruption. And everybody has to play its part. Finlec with the electricity supply, the water supply with CWSA. We have to be in areas where we're going to be safe. And there's sufficient space for us to be safe. In the region, I have been in touch with other prime ministers, and arrangements have also been made. I've spoken about them before for other accommodation if that becomes necessary. Now, if a volcanic eruption of a cataclysmic type of an explosive type takes place, we have the legal framework within which to act. We're a country of laws and not of men and women. There's the NEMO Act, the National Emergency Management Organization Act, Chapter 388 of the Laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, under which we function on an ongoing basis in relation to NEMO. And under that act, if things, while we prepare, hope for the best and prepare for the worst, we have legal provisions there where I, as the minister concerned with this matter, can declare a disaster area, and there's certain powers there. I can order evacuation of premises or an area and excluding persons, vessels or vehicles from any premises or area. There's a whole raft of legal provisions which can be applied, or we can have a public health emergency declared under the Public Health Act as amended last year on April the 7th in Parliament. And then, of course, there's the overall provision of a declaration of state of emergency under the Constitution, if that is required. I mention these legal frameworks because to point out to you that we have certain authority in the laws and in the Constitution, but we must always see these as a shield and not a sword, that we have to work together in a consensual way, in an organized way, in a cooperative way, just in case the worst happens. In the meantime, I don't want us to go up to La Soufriere and get yourself into any kind of danger. The experts tell you that it's highly dangerous to go up there, and you should accept that. We don't want to have people troubling the equipment that we have put in place. We have to be mature about this, as indeed the overwhelming majority of our people are, but we know that there are one or two persons in between who would behave in an irresponsible manner. And it is our own responsibility as individual citizens to make sure that we bring those persons on the straight and narrow path, so that we all behave in a manner consistent with our own interests as individuals, as families, as communities, and as the nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I know some of you would be saying, well, how do we know where we would have to go just in case there is a volcanic eruption of an explosive type and we have to have evacuation and the like? They have been published. I'm sure Michelle Forbes will talk about those in some detail before the program is finished today. And you're asked, well, do we have resources put up for this? The answer is yes. We have currently $40 million in the contingency fund, and that's one side, and we have with the catastrophic deferred drawdown option at the World Bank, where we have $54 million put aside. That's $94 million, that's nearly $100 million. And there are other resources which can become available to assist us just in case the worst were to happen. All kind of detailed preparations have to be made. We are dealing with rural areas where we have sheep and goat, and where we have cattle. There are arrangements so that we can tag them, so that after we move back into the area, if the worst happens, the animals would have a sporting chance of surviving rather than having them tied one place. So there's a multiplicity of things which I assure you that are being thought through, so that we can come out of this in the best possible manner, if indeed the worst were to happen. Now, at the time of COVID, it is a fortunate thing now that we're getting the vaccines, and the vaccines are rolling out. And we have a certain number of vaccines at the moment. We have 40,000 doses, and we have more coming. We expect to have a sufficiency of doses up to 150,000 doses or more, certainly enough to do 70% of the population, so we can have population immunity. This is important because if at the time of COVID, if we have a volcanic eruption of a cataclysmic or explosive kind, not the oozing kind that we have, and we have to have evacuation, it means that we are we're jamming up in a school. There are problems, or inside of in guest houses and the like. There are problems, real serious problems. But if we are all vaccinated, if we all take the vaccine, what the science is telling us, first of all, it's already indicating that to transmit the COVID, if you take the vaccine, it lessens the extent of the transmission of the virus, make it more difficult for you, for somebody who's vaccinated to give you. And if you're vaccinated, for you to catch it. And certainly the evidence is showing that you wouldn't have, you wouldn't get sick, and you wouldn't be hospitalized. And certainly it has a great chance, in excess of 90% to save you from dying, particularly if you have any of the pre-existing comorbidities, which, diabetes, hypertension in a bad way, lupus, you have a kidney disease, you're having a stroke, all of these things which put you in a vulnerable situation. You should take the vaccine. In fact, I have taken it. I got my second dose today, and I'm in all over the country, in all the 39 clinics and all the rural hospitals and health centers. We have the vaccine, I think is rolled out today already, and it's going to be all over the country. And we have the nurses, they administering the vaccines. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, there's a big vaccination program, which will be launched at Victoria Park in Kingstown, and so on and so forth. So taking the vaccine to the community. Now, this is linked to the volcano issue for the simple reason that if we have to evacuate and we have to go in shelters of one kind or another, whatever type of shelters, it's far better for you to have the vaccine than not to have it. It's going to create difficulties for you if you don't have it. And I want us to set about doing that very seriously. That's a very important thing, both for the COVID and for the volcano, just in case the volcano erupts violently, cataclysmically, explosively at the time where we have this COVID pandemic. We are strengthening more the Soufriere monitoring unit. We have resources additional in the budget, which we passed earlier this year. So all in all, we have our preparations, we have our laws, adequate laws, we have a good organization, we are going out into the community, we have good supports regionally from the scientists, and also internationally. We have a sizable pot, and it's always good to have even more money, but we have enough which we can start with if there's any real serious eruption. And I really want to give you the assurance that we are fine-tuning our work day by day. And above all, we must have faith. We must count our blessings. And as I always quote, morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand hath provided, great is thy faithfulness. We don't have to be fearful. Certainly, we don't have to be so fearful that we are overcome by irrationality. The best thing is for us to be calm, to be organized, and work with one another. And we do that, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And that's my message to you, the people of St. Vincent and Grenadines, and especially in North Leeward. I want you to listen to the authorities. I remember a few weeks ago when all what you saw was a glow up at Soufriere. There are people who are calling me on the phone late in the night from Fitzhugh and tell me Soufriere blowing. And I said, no, it's not blowing. It's just glowing. And the scientists had advised that it would glow. But sometimes, nowadays, people listen to unofficial sources, a lot of comment sources. Facebook can be a good thing, but it can be a bad and dangerous thing. So that's why I say listen to the authorities. In fact, the night I had to call Carlos and say, man, people on the streets in Fitzhugh, he said, you know that? I said, well, we have to make the people know that Soufriere is not erupting in any violent manner. Just calm it and go back home. But it tells me that the people of North Leeward are alert. And hopefully, if the worst were to happen, the way we are monitoring, we will have some lead time to move people, to evacuate persons in some orderly manner through the various means as I've just indicated, transport, whether by sea or by road. I think I've spoken enough. I think mainly you want to hear an assurance from me that we're organizing things in communion with you, and be not afraid. Be not afraid at all. We are in this together. Be not afraid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and also thank you for making that link between the volcano and COVID-19 and the need for vaccination in the event that we have to evacuate should there be an explosive eruption. Dr. Irosila Joseph is the director of the UWI Trinidad-based Seismic Research Center. At this time, we'd like to invite her to give some welcome remarks. Dr. Joseph.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at today's virtual community meeting. I do hope that the information that we share today can help answer your questions, and we are continually grateful for the people and government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for their continued support as we monitor the ongoing eruption at Soufriere. So once again, I thank you for engaging with us at this meeting and hope that the information can help answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. At this time, we'd like to present an update on activity at La Soufriere volcano. And to do that is Dr. Thomas Christopher, a volcanologist, and he's based at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, and he's also a staff member of the UWI Seismic Research Center. Dr. Christopher is a volcanologist. He joined the MVO as a junior volcanologist in 1997 during the early stages of the Soufriere Hills volcano eruption in Montserrat. Dr. Christopher specializes in magma chamber processes, has over 2 decades of experience working on an active volcano, and is currently the lead scientific team in St. Vincent. He's the head of the scientific team in St. Vincent at this moment. Welcome, Dr. Christopher.
Good evening. Good evening. Okay, let me all right, good evening. Now I'll proceed to give you a brief update about what we've seen so far at La Soufriere, what the volcano has done, the kind of information we've collected, and what we think is happening based on the information we have collected so far. All right. So just to give you a brief background, because I can remember having questions on the radios about how many volcanoes are actually in the Caribbean or in the East Caribbean. And as far as SRC are concerned, there are 19 systems which are capable of generating eruptions. And at present, there are 2 of them which are erupting, which is La Soufriere, St. Vincent, and Soufriere Hills in Montserrat. Now, over the past few centuries or even decades, we've experienced earthquakes from quite a few other volcanoes in the Caribbean, especially the ones in Dominica. So we know that they're definitely alive and they're not dead. And at some point in time in the future, they will erupt. All right. So La Soufriere eruption styles. Basically, this volcano started erupting late last year, December last year. Now, there's been a lot of talk around with regards to how this volcano erupts. And it's a very well-studied volcano. And basically, so far, in our opinion, you have more or less 2 modes of eruption. You have your explosive eruptions, such as you had in 1902, and then your effusive eruptions, such as 1971. However, 79, that can be considered as a hybrid because it started explosive, then it went effusive. However, this current eruption started slow. It started effusive. Now, because we have never seen an eruption that has started slow and gone violent, does not mean it's not possible. So we definitely can't rule out that possibility. So therefore, we have to account for such a possibility. But at present, what we're having is an effusive eruption, which means the material is coming out really slowly. It's losing its gas, and it's not violent in any way. All right. So what do we do here? Why are we here? Well, we're here for one simple reason. The volcano is erupting, and we're trying to monitor it. Now, there are a number of parameters that we look at when we're trying to see what is happening at a volcano. And the idea basically is when your volcano is erupting, you're bringing lava or magma from deep, and you're bringing it into the shallow crust or even to the surface. And when you do that, a number of things must happen. First of all, that magma needs to break rocks to get to the surface, so it generates earthquakes. So hence we have seismology. What it also needs to do as well is make space for itself, so it deforms the ground. So hence we look at ground deformation, such as the DPS or the INSA, which is satellite deformation. And there's also EDM, but we're looking for shallow deformation with EDM, such as movement on the crater wall, which I'll talk about later. Then there's physical volcanology, which we do. And that involves looking at the rate at which the dome is growing, how big it is, the shape of it, and what sort of dangers it poses. Now, I have deposit mapping in red for one reason. To date, we haven't done that. And that's a good thing, because if we had to be doing that, it means that the volcano would have been spitting stuff outside of the crater. So let's hope it doesn't do that and we don't have to do that. And last but not least, what I have in green is what I specialize in, which is the chemistry of the systems, the magma chamber processes, gas chemistry, rock chemistry, mineral chemistry, etc. Right. So this map gives you an idea of where we've put instruments, the ones we call seismometers, around the island. And basically these instruments are looking for shaking of the ground. And what we're trying to do is to surround the volcano as best we can with these instruments. But we also need some further from the volcano, because the signals that you get from the near stations may not be exactly the same in the far stations, because as the waves travel through the ground, the characters change. So we get different sorts of information from the far stations as we would with the near stations, but all are quite useful as well. All right, so this graph gives you an idea of of the number of events that we've been having. And this graph goes back from September last year until yesterday. So as you can see, leading up to this eruption, it was a fairly quiet period. It wasn't very noisy. And it more or less fits with what the eruption is doing. It's been a very quiet eruption so far. But as you notice, there was sort of a ramping up of the number of events in February. So each of these spikes is the number of events on a single day. So the highest total we had on February 20th was just over 200 events on that single day. But as you can see, it's definitely pulsing. But there is some evidence of an increase as time is going on, however. All right. What this map does, it shows you where the GPS instruments are, and these are the ones which are looking at the deformation of the ground. And basically what the scientists are doing for the GPS is they're looking at the motion between the two instruments, the relative motion. So they're seeing if they're moving towards each other or away from each other. And here we have an example of the Georgetown GPS. And basically what you understand or what you would have seen here or from this slide is that it takes a very long observation time to be able to say much with regards to GPS. So what we try and do is we combine the GPS with the INSAR, which is a satellite deformation technique, because that happens a bit quicker. It sees change faster. So you kind of use them in tandem. But basically what these instruments are doing or how they're set up, they're looking at movement in three components, as in the north-south, the east-west, and the vertical component, which is up-down. So if you think about the magma chamber as like a balloon, if you inflate that balloon, it depends on where you are on that balloon. You may either be moving mostly up or sideways. So we have to account for movement in all directions. But the idea is we can see some weak signals on the GPS because this scale is in millimeters. So there's a slight movement on the GPS scale, but nothing totally convincing yet. But the instruments are working, so we're happy with that. All right. As most people who live on island know that the weather here, actually, well, at the summit of the volcano is not the best at times, and it can be quite unforgiving. So over the past few weeks, we haven't really had a good look at the dome. And the last look I had at the dome personally was on the 18th of February when I took this photo. It was quite a windy day. But one of the things I want to emphasize is that the dome is still stuck between the old dome and the crater wall. So this photo is actually at the top of the Leeward Trail. So as soon as you get to the top of the Leeward Trail and you look, that's the dome looking right at you. But as we can see, to the right of the photo, which is the north, it's a bit, it slopes a bit gentler towards the north than it does towards the south. It's a bit steeper in the south. But that dome has definitely grown and it's still growing. So as we can see, the volcano is still erupting. But what we've noticed as well, because of the buttressing between the old dome and the crater wall, the growth, the majority of growth, the dominant direction of growth is in the north-south direction and not so much up. And it definitely is restricted from growing east-west at any given pace. All right, so as I mentioned before, we haven't really had a good look at the dome recently. So the last scan we had was on the 12th of February, which is not really ideal for us. We would like to have a scan every 4 or 5 days if possible. But like I said, it's up to the weather. But these lines, these circles that you see in this photo to the right basically shows you what the dome footprint is or the outline of the dome at different dates. And as you notice is that the lines in the north-south direction, which is diagonal from top left to bottom right, there's a lot more spacing in between those lines than the lines in the east-west. So it more or less shapes like a peanut. And that's because it has a narrow waist because it's being squeezed by the crater wall and the old dome. So it's growing faster towards the Laracai area and back towards the rope where you climb down into the crater than it is actually in the east-west direction. But as we can see, it's going at roughly 2 cubic meters per second. And from what we've seen so far, it's been averaging roughly 1 million cubic meters every 8 days. So if I were to guesstimate how much more it would have added in the 2 weeks, I would have used that that rate to try and guesstimate, simply because we can't see it. But we'll try and get a scan on it tomorrow. All right, about the rocks. Why are we collecting rocks? I mean, there's been stories in the news about us collecting rocks. But why do we actually collect these rocks? What do they tell us? There's two modes of information we get from rocks. We can look at the chemistry of the rocks, which we will do a bit later. But right now we look at the textures of the rocks. And as you can see, these rocks look like a bit sugary or granular texture as they're described. And they're a bit friable, which means that they crumble. And that tells us that that's a sign of degassing, that these rocks are degassed. So the dome is actually degassing, which is a good thing. Now, we can get age relationships from these crystals based on who is encircling who, or how big they are, or how straight the edges are. But all of that is academic. But just to give you an idea of the kind of information that we can get. And then we can recreate the physical history of the lavas as well as the chemical history of the lavas, as in if they're mixing the other liquids, or if they've come up straight, or if they're picking up crystals from other parts of the crust and bringing them up. All right. So I've been speaking a lot about sulfur dioxide in the news recently. And just to clear up what I was saying about the hydrothermal system and the absence of SO2. Now, if you look at this cartoon, to the right of this cartoon is where you have your dormant volcano. And basically you have your water table, this blue area here, where you've got your water. And basically what is happening is reacting with the sulfur dioxide. So at the top of your dormant volcano, when it's not erupting, you will not be seeing any sulfur dioxide. However, as I said, when I got here, the volcano was already erupting. So I should have expected to be seeing sulfur dioxide. However, when I took those measurements, there was none. And the only explanation could have been that there's groundwater still interacting with the sulfur dioxide being produced by your volcano, and I wasn't seeing it. And the evidence for that is that the lake is still present, because the lake is the top of the aquifer. So as long as the lake is still there, I really believe that we're going to still have issues with scrubbing from this volcano, and the SO2 signal will not be pure until the water disappears. But there's still some water there. But I'm seeing some sulfur dioxide. So that tells me that the water is becoming less, but there is still some of it present. All right. So, I also mentioned in the news that when I got here, I had to rethink what I was doing, because the template I use in Montserrat is very different to the one that works here. In Montserrat, I was relying on sulfur dioxide fluxes as the backbone for my monitoring. But as I just mentioned, there is no sulfur dioxide here, so I can't use that. So I had to use another instrument, which is called a multigas, and look at the plume composition to give us an idea of what is happening. So on this graph here, you can see there were some measurements which I took in 2018. In May 2018, when I was here, I took some measurements from the old dome. And then 2 measurements which I've taken with sulfur dioxide so far since I've been here. Both of them are in February. And as you can see, the red star is February 1st, and the blue star is February 18th. And basically what these graphs are telling me that in 2018, the data was plotted in that part of the graph, which is called HD, which means it was dominated by hydrothermal fluids or hydrothermal gases, which was expected. Now you've got your magma degassing because you've got an eruption on. You have 2 options. You can either be degassing from deep or degassing from shallow. Now, the data I've collected so far shows that there's a deep degassing signal, this DMH, but there's also a hydrothermal component still, which matches with the observations that we've made. So the water is still there. So you're still contributing from the hydrothermal system, but you've got a deep magma that's degassing. So over time, when the hydrothermal system disappears, I would expect all of the data that's collected here to plot in that region labeled DM, which is just purely deep magmatic, because the hydrothermal component would have been gone and disappeared when there's no water. All right. So there's also been some talk about the rocks that we sent away for analysis as well. So this is an example of some of the data we've collected. As I said, the data is partial, it's not all there. But as we can see, this is data from 6 different eruptions from this volcano. I mean, most of this work was done by Professor Robertson, and he published a paper on it recently. I think it was last year, on these eruptions. Well, not the 2021, of course. But basically what we see there, that we've got a really steady state system from La Soufriere. The lavas are more or less the same composition over time. It hasn't really varied much. And that says a lot about how this volcano operates. And it means that it probably has its act together. So the lavas fractionate to a certain composition and then they erupt. So I think that is good to study this volcano because we can learn a lot from it. Now, just to give you an idea of what we can say about the chemistry. Now, as a magma crystallizes, it changes over time. So as you can see here, we've got the 2020, these red stars, and the 1979, which are these blue stars. And one of the things that we thought first when this volcano started to erupt was, okay, what are we seeing? What is being erupted? Is it the 1979 material or is it totally different material? The chemistry is helping us to answer that question. What we see here now is that this magma is more crystallized than the 1979 magma. So it's not the exact same composition. However, it's not the deep magma that's generating the degassing signal that we're seeing. So basically what we think is happening is that we've got the shallow magma that's being pushed off at the top by this deep magma that's down there degassing. And as you can see how the chemistry affects magmas and how they behave, as you increase your silica content, your magmas become more viscous, they become more stiffer. And when your magmas are stiffer, then they're more likely to trap gas. And as we know, gases drive explosions. So that is one of the things why we have a look at the chemistry, because it gives us an idea of how they should behave based on the chemistry of it. All right, so just to give you a brief summary. So to date, we've got this volcano chugging along at 2 cubic meters per second. Once again, that's a good thing because you want slow extrusion and not fast extrusion. Compared to Montserrat, as you can see, that's a bit slow. The dome is degassing freely, and based on the textures that we're seeing in the dome rocks that we've collected, we think that is the case. And that is also a good thing, that we're losing gas. Volcanic events are increasing. Well, they have increased slightly. They're not going berserk yet. And we have over 3,000 so far, but you expect more events to happen as your eruption goes on. So that is not outlandish or unusual. The deformation signal has not been too convincing yet, but we have to keep monitoring. The gas compositions, as I said, shows that there's a deep magma, but you still got a hydrothermal system contributing to your emissions. We haven't seen the deep magma yet, but there's more information to come, and we're looking forward to that information. So to date, we haven't seen anything significant in the eruption to make us think that it's changing its mode and it's becoming more violent. And basically, when we have our discussions in terms of what we think is more likely or most likely to happen, these are the three options we come up with, and more or less in that order. The most likely thing for it to do in the next 6 months is remain effusive, stop, or go explosive. So based on what we're seeing, we think these are the order in which the likelihoods should occur. However, if the volcano does something different, then we'll have to reassess our views as to what we think is happening. So we have to do that on the fly. Now, I use 6 months for a reason. I think on average, the eruptions here last a bit more than 6 months. So I think 6 months is a reasonable window for forecasting. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Christopher. And Dr. Christopher will hand over to Mr. Roderick Stewart as the lead scientist on the ground. He's not going anywhere just now. He'll still be on island for some time, but he will be replaced as the lead by Mr. Roderick Stewart, who is a volcano seismologist at the UWI Seismic Research Center, also based at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory. He has over 30 years of experience in the field and has worked on volcanoes in several countries, including Papua New Guinea and Japan, and he has served as a director of the Montserrat Volcano Observatory from 2012 to 2019. He has been working and living in the Eastern Caribbean for more than a decade and studies seismic activity associated with volcanoes and how it relates to other data. He's the incoming lead for, as I said, for the scientific team in St. Vincent, taking over from Dr. Christopher. Dr. Stewart?
Good evening, everybody. I just want to say that although you see a new face and a new voice you might hear from time to time, it's the same old team. I've been working at the University of the West Indies for almost 15 years now, been working very closely with all the other scientists you've seen and you know, and we work very much as a team. We trust each other, and we speak on behalf of each other. So although you say I'm a new person, I am representing the same team that's been here all along. My specific job whilst I'm here is actually working on the sort of computer data acquisition at the Belmont Observatory. We've put a lot of effort into putting out seismic equipment to monitor the volcano. We've been recording that in Trinidad and in Montserrat, but we're now recording it at Belmont because we need to record it near the volcano. So I'm working at, and I will be working with some local people to train them to help me interpret the data, to help me process the data. So that's just a brief outline of why I'm here and what I'm doing.
Very much, and we look forward to working with you and having you around. It's now time for our feature film, Experience Ashfall and Eclipse. This film is part of a series of films developed as part of the Vol Film Project for increasing resilience to risks from volcanic hazards. Vol Film is a partnership of volcanologists and filmmakers from around the world, including the UWI-SRC and the MVO. Vol Film is funded through the Challenge Fund, a partnership between the World Bank's Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery and the UK Department for International Development, DFID. A full playlist may be found on the UWI-SRC's YouTube channel. We now invite you to view our film.
It went black.
It was all pervasive. It was never ending. The smell of sulfur.
We started running home. We ended up getting caught in it.
Todos los árboles quedaron sin hojas.
It actually covered the sky. It totally blocked out the sun.
When that first explosion went off that Monday morning, and I remember I could have seen that ash spreading across, so dark.
If the ash cloud is coming towards you, you can see it just darkening as it comes. It just killed all light.
And that causes huge problems in people driving, people trying to move, people trying to evacuate. It causes people to panic.
People having a little bit of scream, you know, and then a whole chatter start and everybody was wondering, hey, is this a big one?
It was raining mud and we tried to drive. The windscreen wipers couldn't clean the ash and mud off the windscreen. So we drove home, opening the driver's side door and just watching the roadside curb. And it went from raining mud to raining sand to raining stones. And at midnight we were thinking, is it ever going to stop?
If you have thick ash deposits on the roofs of buildings and then you have rain, the ash basically turns to concrete. About ½ a metre is enough to collapse most house roofs.
Branches collapsing, you're just listening around the forest and it snaps.
You have problems breathing. It gets into your mouth, into your ear, into your eyes as well, and it's just everywhere.
You get a feeling like I'm covered with powder, flour. So a lot of people start wearing long sleeve shirts and button right up to the neck, and the ash mass start coming in.
You're feeling ash beneath your feet. You try to clean your homes, there's always ash. You're feeling it between your teeth. You know, on your bed when you lay down, you're still feeling it. I used to say to myself, how longer that we can ever go on with this?
We prayed for rain, because when it rained, you could open all the windows and you could breathe fresh air and, you know.
In one sense, it was very disadvantageous to us because it killed the young plants, but in another sense, it made the land more fertile. Ash has those chemical components where it enriches the soil. So we have to say we live with it and we live through it. It was a blessing in disguise and it was not also a blessing. But with the ash comes fertility. So a lot of farmers were glad also.
Thank you very much. That was our feature film. We hope that you enjoyed it. Just to let you know that we are opening now for your questions and comments. You can use your right hand to indicate that you want to answer a question, or you can place the questions in the chat box. You can also send questions via chat boxes on various social media platforms. Questions from social media. There's a question. Is an explosive eruption imminent? Is an explosive eruption imminent? And I think that would go to our scientist. Dr. Christopher?
Can you hear me? Yeah, good evening. Based on the evidence we're collecting right now, we have no reason to think that is the case. But I need to emphasize that we react to activity. So if the volcano ramps up in the next hour, then our mind would probably change. But as we speak, we have no reason to think that it's gonna explode anytime soon.
Okay, I think this is also for you. What would happen if the new dome reaches where the old dome is steaming? What would happen if the new dome reaches where the old dome is steaming? Our scientist again, Dr. Christopher.
Yeah, I think the main thing that would occur is that it would cover the fumarole. The new dome has actually covered parts of the old dome. So if it keeps going in that direction, it would actually go over the top of it and cover it. So you wouldn't be able to see the fumarole. If it goes in that direction, it will actually cover it, like it's covering parts of the crater floor.
Okay, and don't go anywhere. I think this one is also for you, Doc. Do you feel, the scientist that is, do you feel any tremors when you're on the volcano trail or at the summit?
I have never felt any tremors personally, but I would have had conversations with people who live in North Leeward who work on the volcano, who would have mentioned feeling shaken from the ground. But me personally, I've never felt any earth shaking. The only issues we would have had up there is from the gas when we're going up.
Okay, another one for you. Did the new dome have a collapse of rock? Reason for the question is that at one point, it was estimated at 93 meters high for some time. Then later on, it was estimated at 90 meters high. So is that an indication of a collapse of the dome?
Yeah, we have a phenomenon which we refer to as rock falls. So they're not collapses, they're just like small parts of the dome breaking off and rolling off the dome. And I think that is what really led to that fire we had in the crater. We had some hot rocks rolling off and getting into the dry grass and lighting it. So as I would have mentioned before, as your dome is growing, because it's a pile of rubble, it's not built properly. So as it grows, parts of it become unstable and pieces of it will fall off. So there are times when the height might be reduced, but it's not considered a collapse. A collapse is when you have a significant portion of the dome moving at once, and that is not what is happening. These are small mass wasting events and not large ones.
Okay, just to remind those persons who are on Zoom that your questions are welcome. Just raise your hand and we will be very happy to respond to your questions. So Zoom questions are also welcome. Another question for you, Doctor. Would it be wrong to assume that the effusion rate is slowing down?
Yeah, I can't say that offhand because I don't have that information. If you notice how we calculate the effusion rate, it's basically between each measurement period. So there are some times when we're measuring within a week of the previous one. There are other times when it's a bit longer. We can't account for what's happening over these long periods. So what we're doing is averaging what it has been over the time. So as I would have also said that you would expect the effusion rate to increase or decrease slightly as it's going along. So we need to be aware that what we're doing is taking a snapshot of it. So where it is at the time that snapshot is taken could give you an impression of it being slightly higher or slightly lower than the average, but you expect it to fluctuate to some extent.
Okay, we have a question from Zoom, a Zoom question. Someone wants to know, what if the wall of the crater on the leeward side breaks? Will the eruption still be effusive?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and it's definitely a scenario that none of us want to have to deal with. Basically, this is one of the reasons why, or the main reason why we've got an EDM reflector in place. Because of where the dome is, if it gets big enough, it could start loading that wall, pushing against that wall. Now, if it pushes that wall down, basically what's going to happen is you're going to expose the interior of that dome, the belly of that dome. And that would be a very rapid decompression of that dome. So what you will actually get is a sideways explosion, which we call a lateral blast, a directed blast through that gap of the crater that's missing. So that is something that we definitely hope does not happen. So if it does that, then it's no longer effusive. It's properly explosive then, and a very dangerous explosion at that.
Okay, you again, when the volcano erupts, can it cause the island to sink?
No, we don't expect it to erupt on that scale. The system is not that big to destroy this island. So we're not thinking anything like that. What the volcano would do is it would push the population back from the northern part of the country, back to the southern part, because it's going to claim a bit of land if it decides to explode. But it wouldn't affect the country as in sink it or anything like that. It's just going to make life a bit miserable in the south of the country, but the island would still be intact.
Okay, and can you tell when the volcano is going to erupt? How much time will we have?
Yeah, this is also a brilliant question. How much time we have, we don't know. Like I said again, we respond to activity or we react to activity. So we as scientists think we know what the warning signs are of a dangerous volcano. When the warning signs start, what we don't get is a countdown like you see in the movies where there's a bomb with a clock in it. We don't know when it's going to go bang. If we think it's going to go bang, we just don't know how long we have. So as soon as we see any sort of indication of what we think is explosive activity, the idea is to get the word out as quickly as possible and to get the people out of the areas that you would expect to be affected. Because as you saw in this video just now, and people who would have witnessed the 79 eruptions, pyroclastic flows are very fast moving hazards. So the best way to avoid them is not to be there when they start, because if you're in their path after they start, chances are you may not be able to leave the area and you will probably be killed.
Okay, thanks. There's someone in the Zoom room with their hand raised. Can you unmute your mic and go ahead with your question, please? Are you there? Please unmute
Yeah, I
your mic.
believe he answered my question already. It was the one about the lateral blast. But I have a follow-up to that one that really, so if a lateral blast is going to be more likely, should the people on the leeward side be more prepared than even people on the windward side in that red zone?
Yeah, I don't remember using the word likely. What I said is if the dome decides to push that wall over, then it could generate a lateral blast. At present, we have no data to suggest that it's pushing against that wall, but it's something that we just need to account for. So just let's say hypothetically, if we thought a blast was imminent, because it's a directed hazard, yes, the people of North Leeward would be in more danger, but we are not expecting one at the moment. Let me just be clear about that. We're just saying if the dome pushes that wall down, it could lead to one, but it's not pushing against the wall yet.
Can you say if any area is more dangerous than the other if an eruption were to occur? So, for instance, is the leeward side or the windward side more dangerous or more vulnerable than the other?
Well, if the question is about a vertical explosion, it depends on where the vent is and the size of the actual event, as in how much volume of material it puts up into the air. And if it gets above a certain volume, it's going to impact all flanks of the volcano, whether it be leeward or windward. Assuming that the dome, the current dome, the new dome is where the vent is, and there were to be an explosion from that area, you would expect more material to come towards the leeward side because the vent is closer to the leeward side. But if it's a fairly large volume event, you're going to get flows down towards Georgetown as well, down the Rebecca.
Okay, at this time, we'd like to know if there are any more questions for Dr. Christopher before we move on to the NEMO director, Michelle Forbes. We can take 2 or 3 more questions if there are any more questions. Doc, I could probably ask you one in the meantime. I knew a couple of weeks ago there was some concern about the rivers coming down on the leeward side being unusually hot. Was this investigated and what was the outcome? What was found?
Are you speaking about the Waliboo River?
Correct.
Yeah, we went and visited that hot spring and we collected some data. We saw a moderate temperature increase, maybe around 6 degrees. We're actually planning to go back tomorrow to revisit that site, collect some more samples and see if there are any changes. But there was a strong smell of sulfur in there, definitely. The guys who went with us were complaining of headaches as well when they went there the first time. However, when we went back that time, certain parts of the hot springs weren't as hot as they were when they went there on their own. So, I mean, and that is not unusual. I think there would be changes over time. So it wouldn't surprise me if when we went back there tomorrow, we would find it slightly hotter in some places or slightly cooler in some places. So we're going to go back and take some more samples tomorrow, do some more gas measurements. And we have a new instrument on island which measures soil CO2. So we're going to apply that in that area as well and see if we measure some soil CO2 in that area as well.
Okay, and there's a final question, and just to let you know that there would be a question and answer segment after Ms. Forbes' presentation. Question probably for Nemo. Will special face masks be made available to residents in these zones should there be a sudden eruption? This question is based on the short film that we just saw a while ago. Ms. Forbes?
Special face masks. The special face masks, we ask persons to wear goggles to protect their eyes, but mainly it will be the regular face mask that we're using now during this current pandemic. So it's a regular face mask because as you move away from the area, it should be less likely that you'll be impacted by some of those particular hazards. But a regular face mask, once you're moving away from the volcano, it's really the persons who are close to the volcano that will need some of the special face masks. But the goggles, for example, are needed. We have goggles in stock, but the regular face masks, damp cloth over your face, for example, those should suffice.
Thank you. And one final question for Dr. Christopher. What will be expected, or what should we expect if the volcano erupts at night? What should one expect if the volcano erupts at night? Dr. Chris?
Well, yeah, it depends on where you live. I think most people on island would hear the sound of the explosion. If you're close enough to the volcano, you might see these glowing avalanches. These pyroclastic flows, they're quite hot, so at night, some of them actually glow. And I think the French word for them is nuit ardent, which means glowing avalanche. So you would probably see some of that if you're in a position to see the flanks of the volcano. What you may also see as well is lightning in the ash clouds, as we saw in that video that was just shown. And you would expect people who are close enough to get rained on by lithics. When I say lithics, I mean rocks, pebbles, or ash. Stuff is going to fall from the sky. You'll also smell gas as well. But depending on where you are on the island, the experience might be slightly different. But I think if there's an explosion from this volcano, I think most people on the island will be aware of what's happening, even if it's at night. They'll figure something is up.
Okay, thank you, Doc. And at this time, we'd like to move to the director of NEMO, Ms. Michelle Forbes, who will talk to plans for the North Leeward area. Ms. Forbes.
I'm going to speak to you today about our plans for North Leeward in terms of our volcano activities. I'm planning for an explosive eruption if possible. I'm hoping that you can see my slides. So we have seen this map for quite some time and sharing around. This is our volcano hazard map for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Are you seeing it? I'm not sure. Okay, sorry. Right, okay. So we have seen this map for some time on the Soufriere hazard map. It's showing you the red zone, the orange zone, and the yellow zone. And if you note that most of the communities in North Leeward are in the orange zone, and I will show you a bit more of the communities there. And we know currently we are in the orange alert in terms of our highly elevated level of seismic activity, and we have diffusive eruption ongoing at the Soufriere crater. Just to remind persons, because I know we have other persons listening in and looking at our presentation and our virtual meeting today, that these are the communities in the red zone, mainly on the windward side of the island from Fancy down to Georgetown, but we also have Wildeboa and Richmond on the leeward end. Just zooming in a bit on the communities in the orange zone, which is on the leeward side. Here you can see the map extending just from that view area there right up to Coles Hill. So a portion of North Leeward is actually in the orange zone, and then we have several other communities in the yellow zone. So we see this map here. This was really produced by our GIS unit in the Ministry of Physical Planning, Lands and Surveys, who have been working with us on these maps. And here you again you can see the clearly the areas that are orange, orange area. So look again at the communities in the orange zone. So we have Fitzhugh, Chateaubelair, Pettibodel, Rosebank, Rose Hall, Trumaker, Coles Hill on the leeward side of the island. So just to be familiar with which zone that you're in. We have been working with the communities a lot. I'm working with the police over the last few months, looking at the assembly points in all of the areas, red and orange in particular, that will need to be evacuated or have assembly points in those areas. Bear in mind, once there's an explosive eruption ongoing, or if there's an evacuation order given, the communities in the red zones are the ones that must evacuate quickly. And in this case, because we have the activities at the western end of the crater, communities in Richmond, Fitzhugh, Chateaubelair in particular would be asked to evacuate promptly as they're on that side closer to the western flank of the volcano. So these are the assembly points generally in these communities in the orange zone. And assembly points are really areas that you will go to wait for transportation if you do not have your own private transportation or have not made arrangements yet within the community. There are also assembly points within the community for other hazards that may happen. So these are generally assembly points for the communities if there's any threat within that community, not just only volcanic hazards, but other hazards that may impact the community. We have been working quite a lot with the Seismic Research Center, the GIS unit, in terms of doing our hazard mapping for these communities. And I'm introducing some of the hazard maps that we have actually done for multi-hazard maps for these communities. And bearing in mind, these maps basically focus on different hazards, not just the volcanic hazard only. So where you see shelters, they're not necessarily shelters for volcanic emergency, but shelters for a hurricane. So we can see where the muster points are. In these communities, the same assembly points or the muster points that I would have mentioned. You have, for example, in Chateaubelair, Mission Corner, and a few others, the Chateaubelair playing field, the Pettibodel playing field, and the Fitzhugh's Government School. So we have done quite a bit of work on mapping the community in terms of collecting data, collecting the vulnerable population, and collecting basically all the resources that we have in these communities. So I'm just giving you a snapshot. So this is a Rose Hall Community Multi-Hazard Map, and here you can see some of the assembly points where people will meet also at works in the Tree Road Junction up there in Rose Hall. This is Trumaker. This is a Trumaker and the Rosebank hazard map, and showing you also the muster points where persons can meet at the Trumaker Government School, at the Rosebank Community Center, to give you a few of the muster points in those areas. So we have been working a lot with the community, and this information has been collected in the community by our persons from the Community Development Division, from the Seismic Research Center, and volunteers who have really worked hard in capturing this information in the community so we understand better what is happening in the community, so we can actually plan better. Now, we have been working at the national level and also with our key agencies in country. And I know someone asked a question, what is happening evacuation in the day versus evacuation in the night? And these are the scenarios that we have been working on and planning in the event that we have an evacuation in the day versus one in the night. The night is going to be can be a bit more frightening, as Dr. Christopher says, because you're going to see the glow. You might see the glow in the mountain, the lightning, the fiery stuff, if you can see it, depend on the stage of the eruption. But these are all the agencies that have been working with us and determining the actions that we are going to take at the national level, the different roles and responsibilities, Royal St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Force, the Cadet Force, the Red Cross, the community volunteers, Ministry of Transport and Works, which will take the lead in organizing the transport. And of course, we know that the police will take charge of the evacuation process, ensuring that people get out of the community. Just to go over when an evacuation order is given, if it is given, because remember, bear in mind that we can have an eruption without an order. If the volcano can erupt with not much time given. So bearing in mind, if we have an evacuation order, by law, the chairman of NEMO, who is the Honorable Prime Minister, can give that order. And we normally have discussions as to the next stages that we're going to take. But that guidance is taken from the scientists. We have discussions as what is happening, what would they recommend, and then of course the decision is made at the national level in terms of whether that order is given. And there are different modes of communication that we are going to use to disseminate this information to the public, to the communities. And these are the different modes. You have the cap.cap, is a cap.cap. This is an application that we have at NEMO that you can actually download on your phones and actually use it. So all different mediums, SMS, Digicel is on board with us, Lime is on board with us, Flow, and all of these modes of communication that we are going to use in the community itself. It will be led by the community leaders and the police using the church bells, the megaphones, the blowing of the horns, conch shell, whatever you can use, method that you use in the community to basically inform persons. Now, many persons are asking, where do I go? And how many persons do we normally have to evacuate? Learning from our history in 1979, we know generally we would have had to evacuate around 20,000 persons. And we're expecting that same number if there's an explosive eruption. So the red zone population from the last census is just over 5,000, and the orange zone is about 11,000 thereabout. And we know there are other activities that we have to undertake within the communities also. For example, we have a warehouse at Rose Hall there. Going up to Rose Hall, those items will have to be removed from that warehouse and staged in the Barley area. Now, where persons are going to go is in terms of the general and safe areas between North Union on the windward side and of course Barley from Curtains coming back on the leeward side. We also have arrangements with guest houses, and the Ministry of Tourism has really been working with the guest houses and hotels to come to an agreement, and they have finalized those agreements. So we now have the list of guest houses and hotels who will be willing to work with us in terms of sheltering evacuees. And many persons are asking where they are going, and we are still doing work in the community. We go into the community a couple of times a week and say to people what is happening, and really identify the areas that you will be going generally. And these are just a few of the areas that you will be going in terms of the community. If you're from Rosebank, you're generally going to the Clare Valley or Willan Hill area, Rose Hall, Vermont, Chateaubelair to Barley, and Chumaka to Petershope. This is just a few because I don't have all the communities listed here tonight. In terms of evacuation procedure, it starts with the individual, it starts with the community, and the communities have really been meeting and working together over the last 2 months or so from the time we had the effusive eruption in terms of pulling together your community plans, mobilizing your team, gathering the data, revisiting the vulnerable persons, the shuttings, to really ensure that we have mapped those persons in communities that will need the support that the community will have to support. And I really want to thank those communities and those persons who have been gathering that information for us in North Leeward and North Windward areas, in the Georgetown area, both in the red and the orange zone. We have done a tremendous amount of work that have allowed us to actually feed the information into our planning in the event of an explosive eruption. So if there's an evacuation order given, or if there's an explosive eruption, there will be announcements on the radios, all media, where the assembly points are, what time the buses will be. We'll have registration, maybe not necessarily before we board the bus, because that can be a bit cumbersome, but at least a count of persons who actually get onto the bus. And of course, the full registration will be done when you get to your site, but we must have a count of the persons who are on the bus, because we have to still trace and account for everyone who will be evacuating. Now, we have been doing a lot of work in the community, not just going around on the megaphones. We have been working with the Seismic Research Center, the Caribbean Development Bank, and what I'm showing you here is some of the community kits that we have prepared for communities in times of emergencies, and these are the communities in the red zone and orange zone in particular. So these are some of the items that the communities have to support themselves in times of emergency, not just volcanic emergency. And some of these were distributed from the Seismic Research Center team this week under the Volcano Ready Community Project. And these are some of the community members who have really been trained in how to manage emergencies, work in the community, mobilize the community, and they will be the ones who are supporting the community in times of emergencies. You can see they have their own individual kit, along with some communities have a community kit. So we have the Chateaubelair Fitzhugh team, Peterborough teams, Rose Hall, and of course we had extended it also. It's on the windward side. Just to show you a picture, we also have Orange Hill, and all those communities on the windward side are part of this whole network of teams and community organizations that we have supporting the national system, and include the Red Cross that work very, very closely with us. Now, as I was saying, as part of our work that we have been doing in terms of informing the community and mapping the vulnerable population in these communities, this is just a snapshot of what we have collected, data that we have collected so far. And we are seeing now here where we have collected the communities, especially on the Leeward side, and this thanks to Mr. Stoddard. He has been working feverishly with the team to really pull together some of these data. The persons who will be requesting transport, we see the numbers here, how much transportation buses we have to provide to evacuate these persons, the number of trips that each bus will have to make, for example. And we have also mapped the number of vulnerable persons per community, so we'll know the type of support that the community needs to evacuate these persons. So it's quite a lot of work that we have been doing. A snapshot, we have the information here, the communities have the information, the police have the information. We know where everyone is in the community in terms of mapping. We would have done that over in 2018, 2019, 2020, leading up to into this Volcano Ready Community Project. And the communities have also been doing that through the Red Cross and other agencies. So it's quite a lot of work has been ongoing. And rest assured that we have this information and we know exactly what the communities have asked for support in terms of mapping the resources of their number of buses in their community and versus the number of additional buses and support they will use. Bearing in mind too that we will have sea evacuation can be done from the Chateaubelair jetty. It has just been completed, and we're happy that work has been completed so that we can actually ease in the evacuation. Recalling we would have exercised that plan in 2019 during the Trade Winds exercise. And it ran smoothly because we did a test run to really show how long it would take to take people aboard a Coast Guard vessel, then up to Barley as the staging area. So these are the things that we have worked on and have as part of the plans. So as I wrap up in quite short, just reminding you some of the activities that we're ongoing, and to let you know that we are also planning a small simulation exercise towards the end of March. In collaboration with CDEMA, SRC. Professor Robertson should be back by then. So we are planning a small simulation depending on the status of the COVID cases in St. Vincent. So we don't want to do too much functional exercise, but we need to do some testing on the plans. We have a budget allocated this year to ensure that we test those plans and plan for any eventuality. So here ends my presentation, just showing you some of the pictures again from the Trade Winds exercise in 29, where we actually tested our National Volcano and Emergency Plan, which was revised in 2014. So thank you very much.
Michelle Forbes, Director of NEMO. I'm sure the people of North Leeward would have been happy to hear that you are actually on top of things in this respect. There's a question waiting for you. Have you ever thought of placing foghorns in strategic areas to alert persons in case of an eruption?
Okay, thank you. I guess the foghorns they're speaking about is the same as the sirens, is it? And we have thought about it. We have actually been exploring the siren option for some time, not just for the volcanic hazard, for all hazards. So we have been exploring that option, yes.
Okay, and someone wants to know who are the leaders of the response teams in North Leeward?
In North Leeward, we have several persons, different communities. In Chateaubelair, we have the Red Cross group. We have Dora James and the Red Cross team in Chateaubelair. The same, we have the Red Cross group again in Rosebank, Mr. Ince in Rosebank, up in Rose Hall. So we work with the existing structures within the communities. We don't reinvent the wheel. We have different persons trained in different areas. So you can contact any head of the Red Cross groups in those particular communities. You can contact the police also. The police at all the stations, they really work very closely with us. So any one of them you can actually work with in the community to get involved.
Okay, and as we move through the question and answer segment, we invite you to complete our feedback survey, a short questionnaire that will allow us to improve on future virtual events. A Zoom poll should be visible in the Zoom room, and a link to the survey will be placed in the chat boxes on social media platforms. And Ms. Forbes, someone was wondering, when do these meetings take place? That's the meetings for the response.
Okay, the meetings are ongoing. The meetings have been ongoing all the last few months. I know for sure the police have been meeting because the numbers are restricted. They are not large meetings. Just bear that in mind. So there are a few select persons from the community who tend to meet within the community because we really avoiding the crowd. We have had a few persons coming out a little bit more than the 10 that was previously stipulated in the mass crowd gathering, and that has increased a little bit. So they have been meeting continuously. The police have been meeting with the groups in all the community. The groups themselves. So there's no set time that they meet, but I will encourage you to you can contact us 4562975 to find out when they're meeting, or Mr. Stoddard is the one who's leading that with the community group. So we can always get in touch with us to find out who's meeting when, where, and the contact persons.
Okay, somebody also wanted to know where the meetings are being held. I'm not sure that at this particular time that there are any sort of large gatherings to facilitate the meeting process. So what has been happening in this regard?
So where we have to actually avoid the large gatherings, we have actually been going into the communities during the what you call the drive-through, using our PA systems and actually giving the information to the community. We stop at strategic points because we know a lot of persons, we cannot go into a building per se to meet. So we stop at strategic points and come and ask questions. We announce when we're coming into the community. So for the last week, over the weekend, we were in the North Leeward area ensuring that persons are aware of the meeting, and we will continue to the weekend in different cities. So we're not having large gatherings in buildings per se, but we are actually going on the road, community to community, and persons of what is happening at the La Soufriere volcano, your assembly points, what to do, what not to do in the event of an explosive eruption. So we are always there coming into the community, so you can listen out as to when we're coming.
Okay, what are your plans if an explosive eruption is not contained to the red and or orange zones, since scientifically it seems like we cannot predict the magnitude of an eruption? For example, does your contingency plans include evacuating the overall population if, God forbid, we ever got to that point?
No hazard map or volcano plan is cast in stone, but I would say too that our historical information is not showing us that we'll have to evacuate the entire island based on the past eruptions that we've had to evacuate the island. And the scientists are here, and I know they can attest to that. We have not seen any scientific information that shows that we'll have to evacuate the island. But of course, depending on the nature of the eruption, if it is worse than, let's say if it's a 1902 eruption or worse, where we actually we continue to examine what is happening, and we may actually shift the zone southwards. So that's why we have the red, that's why we have the orange. If we recognize that it's going beyond what can happen in the orange zone, then we extend the zone further, so then it goes to the yellow zone. You may have to evacuate the yellow zone. So that's the way why we have the hazard maps and the alert level tables in that way. So the hazard maps, of course, the most vulnerable communities are in the red zone. The next high area is in the orange, and of course the yellow. So it will continue to be like that going down. And of course we have the Grenadine Islands are in the green zone. Persons can also be moved to the Grenadine Islands.
Okay, will evacuation cards be given to individual families signifying where their family members can be located?
Not evacuation cards per se. Each family, once you're evacuated, once you actually get to the emergency shelter, each family has a card. What we have been doing also is collecting the information on all the families and indicating where they are going to go. So persons will have a general area where they're going to go. You may not have the exact emergency shelter, but you'll have the general area, because things can go wrong while you're evacuating. You might go to a shelter, one shelter versus the other, but it should be in the general vicinity the community that you have been indicated that you evacuate to. As I indicated, for example, Chateau to Barley, you know that you'll be in Barley, you may not know the exact shelter. One may be at home, so you may have the general area, but cards are given based for each family tend to have a registration process is completed.
Okay, and just to remind you to complete the feedback form via Zoom poll and the link in chat boxes on social media. And there's a question, I think this one is for Dr. Christopher. Prior to the 1979 eruption, the same thing was happening. There was an effusive eruption and the Soufriere exploded on Good Friday. Do you think that there's a likelihood that the same thing can happen again? Good Friday is a few weeks away.
Yeah, I don't think this volcano is going to make an effort to erupt on Good Friday or any particular date. It's going to erupt when the system is primed and in a position to do so. As I said earlier, I don't think it's impossible that you can have an explosive aspect to this eruption. But at present, we don't see any evidence of such a behavior pending at the moment. But it's not outlandish because, as I pointed out, 79 started loud, then went quiet. So because most of the eruptions that have been documented were either explosive or dome building eruptions, does not mean that you can't have hybrids, such as 79 or one in a different order to 79, which is quiet first, then loud. But that is why we monitor. If we see a ramping up in activity, an increase in signals which we consider alarming, then we will react accordingly and get the word out to NEMO as quick as we could.
Okay, thank you, Doc. Some hands are raised in the Zoom room. Joseph, please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Good night. This is for NEMO's director. Some weeks ago, NEMO, by their drive-through, they mentioned that it would not be mandatory for people in Chumuka to evacuate. If there's an explosive eruption, would it be advisable for people in the orange zone, people in Chumuka in particular, because that's where I'm from, to stay in place?
The persons in the red zones are the one who really should evacuate immediately. Also, as I indicated in this particular case, it's Shutterbilly and Fitzhughes. Of course, depending on the situations change. So I cannot, I don't know what is going to happen with the next explosive eruption. If it gets very uncomfortable, and from the guidance that we would have, we will indicate the communities that should it evacuate. But also, you have to take that upon yourself as an individual. Do I feel safe enough to stay where I am? But because we have catered for persons in the orange and the red zone to evacuate, actually. Right? So some persons in the orange zone may not be mandatory, but you have to also gauge your situation. Do I feel comfortable enough to stay here? And it can be very comfortable as as the eruptions, explosive eruptions ongoing. So while we may not say the orange zone mandatory, we'll be monitoring the situation all the time and giving the information as what we see fit and what guidance that we can give to you. But also the onus is upon yourself to determine whether you feel safe enough to stay within that zone.
Okay, just a reminder to please complete your feedback form via Zoom poll or the link in chat boxes on social media platforms. We also have Zodelia with a raised hand in the Zoom room. Please unmute your mic and go right ahead.
No, I asked the question already and I put my hand up.
Okay, so Delia did raise and got her question answered. Are there any plans in the future months for a live camera stream available for public view? And this question is for Dr. Christopher.
We have no plans of doing such a thing. I think one needs to consider the environment we're working in, the logistics that will be required to generate such a feed and to maintain it. I think it will be quite an expensive venture. I think what we can do, or may be able to do, is probably provide stills on if there becomes a website for the Soufriere monitoring unit, then they could probably provide still images of it. But yeah, it's a bit difficult to stream video from there continuously. It's expensive and difficult.
Okay, so stay in place, Doc. Someone wants to know if the volcano can cause a tsunami.
Yes, basically you can generate tsunamis by two main methods, and that is an earthquake which causes quite a bit of vertical motion on the seafloor, or you can put a large volume of material into the sea using an avalanche. And one of the things that we've noticed so far is that island volcanoes, they tend to be poorly built. So from time to time, sections of their cones do collapse. There's been enough studies from cruises around the region where we've seen these deposits offshore in probably most of the volcanic islands, if not all of them. So if that were to happen, if you were to generate a sector collapse, if you were to collapse a cone, a large section of a cone, and put it into the water, then you would generate a tsunami. No, we need to be aware of what a tsunami is, because a tsunami speaks to how it's formed, not the size of it. So you could have a very tiny tsunami. When it gets to you, it's probably a foot high. It's still a tsunami because of how it was formed, but it's not a dangerous one. So in that sense, yes, in terms of generating a very large tsunami, an example of that being in Krakatoa, when Krakatoa erupted in the 1860s, I think it was. I mean, that was a very violent eruption, and that generated tsunamis because you had so much material splashing into the water and displaced in a large volume of water and generating these waves. So if you were to have a scenario like that, where you would disrupt the ocean with a mass wasting event, such as a large collapse, you could generate a tsunami.
Okay, Ms. Forbes, I think this one is for you. Was Curtin Village and Wallaby located in Barley moved from the green zone to the yellow zone recently? So that's Curtin's Village and Wallaby.
Curtains and Wallaby just the green in the yellow zone before you enter the green, and it's more closer to the green. I don't think you should worry too much about it, because really, in we looking at also the science and what I did in 1979, so that Barley, we have considered Barley up to Curtains, those areas pretty much safe. So yes, currently they're in the yellow zone. The main heart of Barley in the center, that is in the green zone. So Curtains are Wallaby area, but should be considered pretty much safe, as it's closer to the green zone.
Okay, and somebody else is asking, where will residents of Petit Bordel be evacuated to?
Petit Bordel, I think I had it on the slide where they would evacuate to. So we can probably have that question afterwards in terms of where you evacuate to. I did not have everyone up on the screen, but we have Petit Bordel. I can't remember if it is actually in the Peters Hope area, but all the communities have been assigned their communities that they will go to. And we'll have these being published all the time. And when we come into the community, we will also announce that.
Okay, with the road access in Chateaubelair being limited presently, has anything been done to improve or speed up access if an evacuation order is given?
We have had some discussions with that. We have to chat with the Ministry of Transport and Works because we know that can actually be a bottleneck there, and we have indicated our concerns in terms of there's an evacuation that the road is not yet completed, and it can actually hinder the evacuation process. So we will bear that in mind, and we're working with the police, especially in that area, who have looked at the situation in terms of how they're going to handle some of that traffic within that particular area.
Okay, and I understand that Prime Minister wants to get in. Prime Minister?
Yes, the question is one which has occupied our attention, and the Ministry of Works, we are working along with the contractor to make sure that the work which is being done there is expedited. Also, as Michelle Forbes said, there are alternate points. Anyone who knows the configuration of the tongue of Chateaubriand will know that, but clearly it is much better if that main way would be open. The other thing too is that we can evacuate persons on a ferry at the Chateaubriand wharf, the newly built wharf. So there would be, in our view, once you do it in an orderly way, we would have it done. But clearly, we need to expedite additionally the work that is being done on the main bridge at Chateaubriand. Undoubtedly, the work should have proceeded faster, but we are working on that.
Okay, there's another question. I think, Prime Minister, you might be in a better position to answer this. Someone wants to know if a person or family evacuates on their own, would they be able to get assistance from the government?
Well, I take it that you would be evacuating to maybe another friend or family, and we will seek to provide assistance both to those who we evacuate into, whether it's a guest house, whether it's the schools or any other public facilities, as well as evacuating into other individuals' homes. Experience teaches, experience taught us last time, and also in other countries in recent times, take Dominica. When you move into a home, clearly you have to provide food and other supports for those who are moving in. You're not going to expect the family which is hosting you to bear the cost of all the persons who are coming into the home. And in fact, so we'll have to assist, but experience also teaches that the host family, in the circumstances themselves, may need assistance. Because if you have livelihoods disrupted throughout the whole country, it's going to affect the economy. We have seen how an event, we can see how a pandemic like COVID affects the economy. And we saw it at the time of the last volcanic eruption. And if that were to happen, it will affect it. So that both the family moving in, Teresa, and the host family will need assistance. Clear. I mean, to begin with, you have more people going to spend money on electricity. You have more people in the house. They're watching the TV longer. Nowadays, internet facilities, it's a cascading set of costs. So we'll have to assist on both those who go into the homes and those who are hosting.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Is the Zoom room exhausted? Other questions? Ralph? could you unmute your microphone and go ahead, please? And this is Ralph, not the Prime Minister.
Oh, well, first, I should give credence by saying good night to the other Ralph, who is actually Ralph, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez. Good night to you, sir, and as well as other members on the panel. First, let me say thank you very much for continuing to sensitize the nation as it relates to developments relative to the effusive eruption at the La Soufriere volcano. Thanks to NEMO and all entities who have been involved in keeping us abreast and for boosting our knowledge base as well. My question, I believe it will be directed to the lead scientist. If I'm correct, his name is Dr. Christopher, and I stand to be corrected. And I think I read from a previous NEMO update, one of the daily updates, and maybe from a news article as well, that certain samples were sent off to labs abroad, labs abroad for testing. What I didn't hear of is the results from those lab tests which were done. I can't remember if they were soil tests or, well, it's not going to be gas, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if it was soil tests or samples in liquid form which were sent off. So I wish to ask that question. And if I may just juggle my second question one time, the scientist on a previous interview mentioned that prior to coming to St. Vincent, he had a certain level of expectation or maybe anticipation, but upon arrival and investigation, his expectation changed. Reality was off, or it was different. If he can probably elaborate a little bit on that as to what he has witnessed, what is so different based on what his expectations were. So those are my two questions.
Okay. The samples we sent away were rock samples, not liquid samples. We have liquid samples collected, but we haven't sent them off yet. And I'm going to collect some more liquid samples. I sort of presented some of that data, some of the chemistry data that we got in the presentation towards the back end of it. And what we can see is that the material that's coming out now that we've sampled so far is more crystallized, it's more evolved, as we call it, than the 79 eruption. Because the data is partial, that is the most we can say right now with any certainty. We'll have to wait for more information before we can say anything else that will hold substance. Can't remember the second part of the question. With regards, basically what I said was, what I do in Montserrat, I use sulfur dioxide fluxes as the backbone for my monitoring, for my degassing monitoring. When I got here, I wasn't seeing any sulfur dioxide. So I had to readjust. I actually did some reading, read some papers to figure out what I need to be looking at instead of the sulfur dioxide flux, which I don't have. And I think I've figured that out now. So that's why I had to readjust what I do, because it wasn't as proper template. Didn't fit what I was doing exactly. It was different. That's what I actually meant.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was our last question for the program. Just before we go, Ms. Fobbs, I think you say you do have the answer to the question that was asked earlier on, so we can take that before we wrap up.
I think my colleagues would have already typed the answer, but just the person from Petit Bodel was asking where they're going, and that area is actually in Camden Park. The folks from Petit Bodel, persons that will be evacuating if they have to evacuate, the general area is the Camden Park area. So we would have the Camden Park Secondary School, the community center, the newly built community center, for example, within that area.
Okay, thank you so much. And for additional questions, you may contact NEMO or the UWI SRC via their websites or social media platforms. Links have also been placed in the chat boxes. And just a reminder, please complete the Zoom poll or survey link in the chat box. Remember, you can also check the weekly La Soufriere Today interview on the UWI SRC's YouTube channel for regular updates on the volcano. That's our program for today, Eyeing La Soufriere. Thanks to all our participants, to our presenter, Prime Minister Dr. Ralph E. Gonsalves. Thank you so much. Doctors Iracilla Joseph, I got it right earlier on, Christopher Thomas, Roderick Stewart, and of course, Director of NEMO, Miss Michelle Forbes. We also wish to thank NBC, VC3, UWI TV, and the team at SRC. Continue to be safe as we keep eyeing La Soufriere. Good evening.